Hello, my name is Mark Campagnaro. I'm a teacher at Clovis West High School and a member of the PhD program at Liberty University. Behind me, as you can see, are the Sierra Nevada foothills leading to the Sierra Nevada mountains. It is here in 1850 and 1851 that the Mariposa Battalion led an excursion all the way that led to the discovery by Americans of Yosemite Valley. Now, the significance of the Mariposa Indian War, as it became known, and the Mariposa Battalion are twofold. The war resulted in the displacement, significant displacement of Native Americans from their ancestral lands in this very area that we can see here. It also resulted, as I mentioned, in the American discovery of Yosemite Valley. And as we will discuss, this resulted in Yosemite Valley becoming one of the most famous locations in the United States. Now, it's important to remember in this period of time that just 2 years prior, in 1848, gold had been discovered in Northern California at a location known as Sutter's Mill, just 35 miles northeast of modern-day Sacramento, which is, of course, the capital of California. Now, in 1849, word had spread to not only the east coast of the United States, but all around the world. And in this, people began to flock to California. This also resulted in people flocking to this very location here in the Central Valley and into the Sierra Nevada foothills. These locations became very important for farmers, for ranchers, and for those seeking their fortune in gold. Now, this massive movement of people into this area led to natural conflict between Native Americans and the American settlers. Now, the California territorial government, of course, wanted this influx of people. They wanted Americans to settle here far in the west, and so they passed in April of 1850 the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians. Now, the California Research Bureau has a really good discussion of this act, and according to that research, this act facilitated removing California Indians from their traditional lands, ultimately resulting in a lot of separation of families and a disbursement of Native American culture. This also led to indentured servitude among Native Americans. Many Native Americans became indentured servants to white American settlers in this region. Now, on September 9th of 1850, California became famously the 31st state in the Union. And it was just a few months later that here in the land of which we are standing on today in the Central Valley, conflict began to rise up between Native Americans and American settlers in this region. Now, in November and December of 1850, attacks by Native Americans, reports of these attacks began to reach the California government, and the attacks were done by different Native American groups, the Ahwahneechee, the Chowchilla, and the Yokuts. They had begun to attack trading posts, settlements, and other different establishments by California American settlers. Now, one of these settlers was a prominent man named James D. Savage. He had established a trading post and was a major connection point for communication between white American settlers and Native Americans in the area. Now, in February of 1851, California Governor John McDougall authorized the creation of a state militia in order to put down hostile Native Americans in this region. Now, this region was known as Mariposa County. Now, Mariposa County is, of course, a county still today, but it was much, much larger in 1851. It encompassed what is today Fresno, Madera, and Mariposa counties. Now, on February 18th, the Mariposa Battalion, which was the name of the state militia, encompassed about 200 state volunteers and was in cooperation with the Mariposa Sheriff, James Birney. Now, the leader of this Mariposa Battalion was none other than James D. Savage, the trader, who was, of course, a major trader in this area and who was a major communication point between Native Americans and American settlers. Now, the official objective of the Mariposa Battalion was to retaliate against the Native American tribes for their attacks on American settlements, as well as to relocate Native Americans to the new Fresno Indian Native American Reservation. This was, of course, became indicative of larger American Indian policy at the time, was to move Native Americans to reservations, which starts, of course, back in the 1830s with Oklahoma. Now, the battalion begins to move in early March of 1851. They move into the Sierra Nevada foothills, which looked almost exactly like this. I mean, this is what the landscape would have to look like, traveling through locations such as Bear Valley, Indian Gulch, and the South Fork of the Merced River. Now, on March 19th, the battalion approached the Upper Merced Canyon, and on March 27th, just a couple of weeks after their beginning, they reached Yosemite Valley. Now, discussions of this are put forth by a couple of the members of the battalion that actually wrote about their experiences afterwards. One of them was Lafayette Bunnell. His book has become a very important primary source on this, as they discuss the awe that the American soldiers felt as they entered the militiamen, I should say, as they entered Yosemite Valley. A scene that is so very common to many of us Californians today, but at the time had never been seen by an American before. Now, when Major Savage and the Mariposa Battalion reached Yosemite Valley on March 27th of 1851, the Ahwahnechee tribe were living in the valley, and they had for a very long time. Now, of course, the goal of the battalion, the stated goal, was to retaliate against these Native Americans. So what did they do? They ended up burning down their villages. So any kind of traces of the Ahwahnechee tribe living in Yosemite Valley was quickly stamped out. Now, Chief Tenaya, who becomes a major figure in this what becomes known as a war, Chief Tenaya and his people are able to avoid capture by the Mariposa Battalion, and they escape. And this starts a very interesting and dramatic back and forth between the Mariposa Battalion, James Savage, and Chief Tenaya. Now, in April, Major Savage, as you might imagine, was not happy that Chief Tenaya and his people had gotten away, and so the Mariposa Battalion, led by Major Savage, they led future expeditions deeper into the Sierra Nevada mountains. Now, the high country of the Sierra Nevada mountains, it gets pretty intense. Of course, we get up into higher and higher country, meaning harsher and harsher terrain. The forest is significantly more thick, and it gets colder. Now, unfortunately for the Mariposa Battalion, they were not able to capture Chief Tenaya as of yet. However, they did, in an unfortunate display, use Native American women and children that they had captured along the way. They used them in order to attempt to force the Native Americans into negotiations. Now, in May, American forces had arrived, and the Mariposa Battalion was able to get some guidance from Captain John Bowling, and he leads an expedition of the battalion and is able to corner Chief Tenaya and his people. Now, ultimately, Chief Tenaya ends up surrendering because the Mariposa Battalion captured his 2 sons, and so once they had his 2 sons, of course, the chief had little option but to surrender. Ultimately, the Ahwahnechee tribe was then forced to relocate onto the Fresno Indian Reservation. Now, throughout the summer and fall, again, that part of the war ends in May of 1851. But throughout the summer and fall, there are treaties signed. However, the treaties are very loose. Just like this becomes a kind of commonplace with Native American and American relations throughout the American West. A treaty would be signed, but one side or the other would not live up to the treaty negotiations. So ultimately, Chief Tenaya and his people attempted to return to Yosemite multiple times, but they ultimately end up failing, and this leads to further and further conflict between the two groups. Ultimately, by the end of the fall, the Native Americans had either dispersed or had gone to the Fresno Indian Reservation, ending the Mariposa Indian War. Now, the legacy of the Mariposa Battalion and the Mariposa Indian War ultimately rests in Yosemite Valley and Yosemite National Park. It, of course, has become one of the most famous tourist attractions in the entire world. From El Capitan to Half Dome to Bridal Veil Falls, it is a beautiful place of natural wonders. And it's ultimately thanks to the Mariposa Battalion, even though they, of course, discovered it, and this is the reality, is that they discovered it through violence. Right? They were chasing these Native Americans up into the hills, and they ultimately dispersed the Ahwahnechee tribe that were living in the area. And this is the reality of the discovery of Yosemite Valley. It's important to remember this historical context, right? And it's important to remember in primary sources like Lafayette Bunnell's when he writes about his discovery and his part in the discovery of Yosemite Valley. Because shortly afterwards, artists and entrepreneurs and other tourists begin to visit the valley. They begin to paint the valley, begin to see it as a place where Americans might want to visit someday, and of course they would be correct. And in 1864, President Abraham Lincoln famously signs the Yosemite Grant. And the Yosemite Grant granted the state of California this location as long as they kept it for public use, resort, or recreation. So in other words, it could not be sold for private use. Now, this act is considered generally in U.S. history the first of its kind leading to national parks. And of course, in 1890, Yosemite would become America's first national park, alongside, of course, those like Yellowstone. Now, in 1868, a very famous man to note here is John Muir. John Muir, of course, he visits Yosemite, he begins to write about it, all of his experiences in Yosemite, and it becomes a place of mythological beauty, as it is for Californians, for those of us who live in California and have our entire lives. We know Yosemite so well. For Americans broadly, it's a place that Americans love to visit, and it's a place where if you go there, you will notice people from around the world come to visit it. However, it's important to remember that ultimately the American discovery of Yosemite Valley was not a peaceful event. It was an event filled with war, filled with displacement of peoples, and ultimately, it was a complex history event. So, the discovery of the Yosemite Valley by Americans, by the Mariposa Battalion, an important event, but a complicated event in itself.